Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be discussing The Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester, also known as Tiger, which was the original name in the UK. And this is a classic sci-fi novel that was originally published in 1956. It's compared to be a revenge tale in the realm of Edmond Dante's in The Count of Monte Cristo. And I'd even had to, this was specifically recommended by Fit to be Read. I will link that channel in the description in a live show I did. And like I said, you already got me interested when you say Edmond Dantes in space. I was already interested there. I love Monte Cristo. And then I went and I was looking at the book online and I read the introduction for this copy, which is written by Neil Gaiman. And he's basically talking about how this is just that rare sci-fi novel that really doesn't immediately feel dated. A lot of classic sci-fi, when it takes place either in a time that's now in the past, or that's really nearby, or has technology that's supposed to be futuristic, but actually it feels, even the futuristic tech feels outdated. So you get that with a lot of sci-fi, and this was supposed to be a book that really very much did not feel dated. I have to say, both of those items where it's recommended, absolutely I agree with, because this did not feel like a book that was written in the 50s at all to me. Barring, there were a few things with the word choice, not slurs, but just using terms you don't really use for races anymore, like Oriental and Negro were both in here multiple times. Just kind of using those words, which aren't really the PC words to use anymore. And just kind of, that was the only thing really that felt dated. And in the 50s, that was probably normal speech. And so that was pretty much the only thing. But really, this took a really unique approach. Most of the references are into hundreds of years in the future, even from now. There were a few references to events that would have happened around our time now. But those were past events, and it was vague enough that there was no big thing. You're like, oh, this seems unrealistic. And I know it's science fiction. It doesn't necessarily have to feel realistic, but reading through, like I said, this really didn't feel like this was that old of a novel, and it did some really interesting things. So this book is one, too, where when I finished reading it, I'm like, I don't know how to rate this, and I really wasn't sure what my thoughts are. So I will apologize in advance if this review gets kind of rambly, because this is part review, part me just talking my thoughts about this book out loud to try and figure out what I really did think of it, because it was an experience. It wasn't like I read this book. I feel like I experienced this book, but it was really interesting, and I want to get into more details on it. So there's the kind of the premise here. The first thing is it talks about what's called jaunting, and jaunting was first discovered by somebody who had the last name Jaunt, and I like that the little play between it's jaunting, which is an actual word, and it means basically teleportation. And it gives a really brief story, because this is, I should mention also, a very short book. It's very fast-paced, and actually takes place over a couple of years, all told, so a lot gets packed in very quickly without a lot of info dumping. But so basically, it's somebody discovered in a life-threatening situation that they could teleport a short distance, and then for years after that, people studied it until it became just something that literally basically everyone can do. If you can't jaunt, you have the worst job prospects at all, because it's just kind of a normal thing, and it completely changed the world. So a good sci-fi novel, I think, and granted, I don't know, maybe I'm not one to talk because I haven't read a ton of sci-fi, but I think that's a great way to start, where we have this premise of what kind of switched off. It talks about different ages of Earth, and this is start of the jaunting age. And so it was using something that is unique, and also using something that as a basis is not specifically going to involve outdated tech, or just specifically even involve technology. It's more so the human mind, and it's determined that basically with focus anybody can do this. It did remind me a lot of part of Brandon Sanderson's Skyward series, and/or Defending Elysium, the really earlier novella. Makes you really wonder if he read this book and took any inspiration from it, because it just, part of it reminded me of that, and he does it differently than Alfred Bester did in this book, but just kind of the general idea of it. I thought was really interesting. But so that's kind of the base plot for the science fiction part of the world, but we've been in the space age. There are people that live on the inhabitable planets in the solar system and on the moons. You have like the inner planets and you have the outer planets. And we start with Gully Foyle. And Gully Foyle is the last survivor on a basically wrecked ship that's floating through space. And he is desperately trying to stay alive, hoping somebody will come to rescue him. He is, living in a state of never knowing when he's going to die, just foraging for oxygen and rations that aren't destroyed in this ship, and then staying on like the one part of it that still can hold in air, and that's his life. And he's there for an undetermined amount of time, and after then he sees a ship come by, and he goes and immediately is putting out emergency beacons and trying to hail them and trying to get them to come rescue him, and they leave him by. He vows from that moment on that he will kill them. He'll kill them filthy. And that is kind of the instigating action for Gully Foyle. And he just is completely determined to get his revenge. Now, the ways and the kind of the path that travels to get there, very unique and very interesting. And just, once again, there are so many elements here that are super interesting with what happens and the way it happens. And he ends up, of course, having a very rough path. And there's I can't decide if it's a spoiler or not, but you can see even on the cover, he's got symbols all over his face. There's a real good reason for that happens. And it's just kind of another thing that kind of makes him really unhinged. And this is very much a revenge tale. There's a lot of other stuff going on. There's definitely some kind of like anti-corporation thoughts and commentary in there, with looking at how the world is run, because the world, at least on Earth, or it's called Terra, which also pretty common for sci-fi, is basically the elite are these people who have come from really old money. And he does use some company names that probably would not have made it that far, but at the time you probably would have thought like Kodak's in there, and I'm like, Kodak's probably not going to be the super rich people in hundreds of years still. So there's definitely that. But we see this kind of, the elite, and some other interesting aspects of the world is the wealthier you are, the less you're supposed to rely on technology as like a fashion statement. Like the more old-fashioned you do things, it basically shows that you have enough money that you can afford to do that. Like if you have an antique car or an antique phone, things like that are completely impractical in the current world, especially because people can literally teleport around to a degree. That shows you wealthy. So it was an interesting way to include some of that, some old tech, some stuff like that. And I don't know if it was intentional, that even if those things, it would have seemed crazy like nowadays, where if it's a normal sci-fi and they're still using like really old cars, you'd be like, oh, old car. But here it made sense. It was specifically mentioned that having these completely impractical antiques, it specifically showed that you had enough money to afford that, to either to have them restored or to have gotten to begin with. So there's a lot of really interesting bits set up for the world. And then, like I said, this really is a completely revenge story. And Gully Foyle is a terrible person. He's probably completely insane. He's hell-bent on revenge, and nothing is going to stand in his way. He does some terrible things throughout. And I feel like with in Monte Cristo, at least the character, like they were an innocent victim, and they did go to get their revenge. And Edmund did some bad things, but it seemed like there were some redeeming qualities to an extent with him, where Gully Foyle not so much with the redeeming qualities. But once again, this type of character is not at all the type of character I would have expected in a book written in 1956. This just horrible, brash rage monster, hell-bent on revenge, doing terrible things. This seems much more modern, especially when you look to with kind of like the gray characters or the just straight up bad guy or the antagonists and whatnot in like grimdark or dark fantasy. The elements of that seem quite modern to what I've seen. So I would recommend this. For anybody who likes classic sci-fi, this seems to be a great example of it. This is supposed to be, it says number 5 of the Millennium Sci-Fi Masterworks series. I don't know if that's still accurate, because even this copy was published like 30 years ago. but so it's still, though, it's looked at as a classic of sci-fi. Really, honestly, like I said, besides the things that I mentioned early on, with some of the word choices, which is not something you would hear nowadays, which granted, you could make an argument that maybe they went back to it later, I don't know, but besides that, it really did not feel dated in a lot of ways, but also just with having the morally corrupt character be your main character, for those who like grimdark, or they like books where you get characters who are bad people. This also is something I would recommend to those types of readers, because you really get a lot of that. And you do get some other parallels between this and Monte Cristo, which I think were very much intentional. You get to see some of the same sequences. Things happen very differently, but you do get to see sequences that will absolutely remind you of that, as he has to go against the odds and accumulate wealth in order to try to basically get his revenge, and figure out every connected person. But it's done in a different way because of the fact that sci-fi, and there's all of these interesting things going on in the world besides, and you learn quite a lot about the world, about other characters through the interactions as well. So you really don't, like I said, this is very fast paced and there's not a lot of info dumps, but yet you really do get a very complete picture of the world, I think, and it's just impressive that all of that was done in such a short book. The world is very well developed here. The system of jaunting and basically the reasons for that to change the world are explored, and it shows not even just like science changing, but society changing completely, because of the fact that people can just teleport. That changes everything about security and privacy, about travel, and it would completely, if something like that happened in our world, like it did here, would completely overturn so many different companies, so much of the economy, and even somewhat the stability. And that's really brought up and shown, and you get to see how that really changed things, which I found to be honestly as interesting as the main story. So like the kind of the background, the catalyst for the age of jaunting, I found to be so fascinating. And the rest of the story as well, with like the revenge plot, also I thought was extremely interesting. And just like I said, the things that happen in this book, and granted, Gaiman mentions too, straight up in the introduction, that he basically said like there would be very few things that'd be different if this was written today. And one is just basically it would show some more of the things in the scenes that happen, instead of just implying that it happened and then addressing it later. The book does have fairly early on an implied rape scene, and it doesn't go into any detail. It is confirmed later that that is what happened, but you do, that's especially in the darker stuff nowadays, I feel like you do get that a lot. I think it's overused, to be honest, but it really is just showing basically who this character is, and that they once again are a terrible person. And the ending also of this book, because revenge stories usually only can end one of like two ways. Like the person gets their revenge and everything's fine, or something fails miserably and they don't get their revenge. This book does neither. It completely changes the game with the ending. And once again, this is from 1956. This book is 65 years old. 65 years old, this book is. And it really just did something so different that even now, new books are written with the same tropes that this book avoided. And so the way it ended, I found to be really satisfying. And it's very open-ended, which I think works for this story. But you do get a little bit of closure, and it's just kind of showing, once again, using it to show the world, these characters, how they all react to some different things. And there's definitely the ending, I feel like, might be a little bit hit or miss for people, because just the style of it could be an issue. But honestly, this was just, like I said, this was an experience, and definitely for people who like darker stories, terrible characters, terrible people as characters, not a terribly written character. I have to specify, because characters were written well, I thought, in this. But if you like that, like classic sci-fi, I highly recommend this. This was, I feel like I've been saying this a lot lately, because I've been trying a lot of different things, but this was like nothing I've ever read, really. And like I said, the big thing was it actually reminded me some of the technology, I guess I could say, from Brandon Sanderson's Skyward series, which I thought was really interesting. But the way everything was used and fleshed out here was just superb. This was really well written, and I mean, like, the things, the main characters is not a good person, and the things that happen are terrible. And I realized after talking, I still really don't know how to rate this book. I really don't, but I did enjoy the experience, and I do recommend trying it, just to see what you think of this book too. Also, I'd love to chat with people if you've read this book. I'd be really curious to know your thoughts, because besides Fit to Be Read, like I said, who actually recommended this, I'm not specifically sure of anybody else who has, so I'd be really curious to find out, just because this was like nothing else that I have read, in a good way. And it really did astound me that it's that old and it was written that long ago, and yet is the way that it is, which is kind of hard to explain without more spoilers. Which I didn't really say any spoilers. Like I said, if Neil Gaiman tells you something in the introduction, unless you're one of those people who don't read introductions, I feel like that doesn't count as a spoiler. That's what I'm going with, but I definitely recommend this book. And like I said, let me know if you have read this, what your thoughts are on it. You can let me know in the comments. Also, of course, you can check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to come chat with me there, or chat about books, anything else. Always a ton going on there. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.